All right, good morning, everyone. This is Nathan Lindorf with the Rational Independent. Last lap. We are going to close out this video analysis. One final part will be a little longer than the others, and then we'll stitch it all together. Thank you all for your patience. Enjoy. Once again, this is Patrick Bet-David interviewing Neil deGrasse Tyson, and they're discussing COVID vaccines and, more importantly, government policies around COVID vaccines, communication, freedom of speech, that sort of thing.
Break out. All of a sudden, you start breaking out. And the doctor says, listen, man, what have you been doing differently? Well, listen, for the first time in my life, 6 weeks ago, I started doing DECA, steroids. Well, okay, that's why it implicates it, right? Okay. Hey, if somebody all of a sudden, you know, is having a hard time sleeping at night, I'm having a very hard time. So let's watch your diet. Well, then they notice at 10:30 at night, you're having iced tea and, you know, lemonade, and you add it with this. Well, listen, if we've been doing it for 6 weeks, that's why you're having a hard time. Just drop that. Don't drink that after 2 o'clock. I'm just making, you know, saying, but all I'm saying is, what I want to know is I want to put everything on the table versus saying, no, there's one thing we can't put on the table, and that's the cause of the vaccine.
So Patrick Bet-David, I love him because he speaks in paragraphs, but he's laying out a simple case, and fundamental to this whole conversation is that he lays out an excellent case that's persuasive to a layman, to a lay person, to a non-expert. However, that's not persuasive to the expert class, which scientists hold themselves to be, to have a measure of expertise. They rely on that scientific authority in conversation and how they view the world. So Patrick Bet-David is saying, listen, I'm a grown-up, I'm an adult, I'm a businessman, I'm a part of this society, and I would like to analyze the risks associated with the COVID-19 vaccine and see if there are potential downsides to taking the vaccine. Let's look at all the data, let's analyze it, let's understand it, let's look at the global picture. Even if it's a kooky idea, let's discuss it. Because even if it's kooky and we discuss it, that discussion is going to lead us to conclude it's kooky, and therefore we disregard it. Or if it's got some merit, maybe that helps everybody. This is the basic idea of a free exchange of ideas, the marketplace, to enable every participant in the marketplace to offer their best ideas, their best reasoning, their most persuasive arguments to try and sway public opinion. I think that's critical to civil society. I think it's more important than scientific expertise. However, Neil deGrasse Tyson does not agree. And throughout this conversation, he's been arguing from a position of scientists are better at rationally understanding cost-benefit analysis. And so if the scientists tell you that they've run the analysis and this is the benefit, then you need to just listen to them and do what they say. If they tell you, don't entertain that notion, it's dangerous misinformation, and if enough people believe it, it's going to undercut our efforts to heal and save the population as a whole. Now, they might be right or they might be wrong on the facts, on the veracity of their statements. That's something that can and should be observed. However, the argument is not without merit. Before we understood cholera ravaged whole cities, whole areas. Basically, it's because it's water-based infection. And so anywhere that water supply was infected, everyone who drank from that water would deal with cholera. Science helped us understand that vector of transmission and helped to change human behavior on a large enough scale to protect us from that disease. And thankfully, cholera is no longer a major threat because of that understanding and because, in a way, that training of the human population. So I'm not saying the argument of expertise is without merit, but science and the pursuit of scientific truth is about testing. It's about observation. It is about embracing the rigorous analysis of the actual results of your actions. So a scientist trying to persuade a population in a third world country with very little scientific understanding how they get infected with cholera, he doesn't do himself any favors by arguing with the local witch doctor that the witch doctor is saying it's an evil spirit, and so we need to pray to ward off the evil spirit or do a ritual, burn incense or whatever. non-scientific hocus pocus. The scientist should be able to argue effectively enough that the people turn from their superstitious thoughts and embrace the effectiveness of scientific teaching. That's not what's happening with COVID. With COVID, science has basically said anything that contradicts our current opinion, our current understanding, is not allowed in the marketplace of ideas. We're not going to have any counter-arguments because counter-arguments are dangerous. That's the sign of someone who doesn't want true scientific analysis of their behavior. Because science should be double-blind, should be randomized. Science should achieve the same result, regardless of the biases of the humans involved. That's the reason we train people to have this expertise, is to achieve these results that are repeatable, reliable, consistent, and able to move us ahead as a people. But the medical administration and the institutional authorities surrounding COVID, and more importantly, the conversation around COVID, were acting like they had something to hide. They were acting like in The Wizard of Oz. Don't worry about the man behind the curtain. There's stuff going on here that we don't want you to look at, that we don't want to talk about. That makes people distrustful. That undermines scientific credibility. It does the opposite of what science and scientists claim to want.
There is no way there could be any negative impact because of the vaccine. That's ludicrous.
No one has ever said that ever about any vaccine.
If you say that, then the question then becomes back for you to say, when COVID first got started, I invited so many doctors to come in to talk about COVID. And then I invited people from both sides. I want both sides. I invited people from both sides. You know which side would never come? The side that was for vaccine would never, ever come because they thought they were above the average person, that they know and the rest of us are dumb. So because of that, they're not willing to come and sit down with scientists. I think that's arrogant. So to me, when I ask you scientific debate, I'm not telling you I'm a scientist. Hey, let me debate with you because I'm smarter than you. I'm not a scientist. I'm a business guy.
Let's do a hypothetical scenario. Hypothetics are, let's assume an actual cause and effect has been established in this case.
Sure.
Which it's not have to see the film to know.
I'll send it
I don't
to
know
you.
that it.
Yeah.
Quick bit of context in case you're jumping in on this video. Patrick Bet-David brought up the idea that prior to the COVID vaccine, a very, very small number, I think 20 some odd elite athletes in Europe had heart issues. And after the vaccine, on the order of thousands of athletes had reported severe heart issues. And one of the things that people are starting to see, and perhaps we're starting to build a bit of credible understanding on, is that it appears that the vaccine might implicate heart issues, particularly in younger, healthier populations. It seems to affect certain demographics differently than other demographics. The vaccine does. There's this is not scientifically proven, but it's an interesting piece of data. And so Neil deGrasse Tyson is basically saying there's a temporal link there, meaning one happened after the other, but we haven't identified causation yet. They're correlated, which is fair. Skepticism is good. And that's what's kind of leading into this conversation.
A cause and effect other than a coincidence in time relative to other things that people might have been doing. By the way, alcohol consumption went up during COVID significantly. Okay, and alcohol is implicated in heart disease. So
depression, anxiety, people staying at home,
kids, opioid
addicts, addiction.
Okay.
So those staying at home.
So Neil deGrasse Tyson is pointing out, in fairness, as a scientist, these are a bunch of confounding variables. These are a bunch of elements that make it not easy to just draw a straight line A to B causation. This happened before, this happened after, therefore this is the cause that takes us from A to B. And he's right as a scientist. He should doubt. However, the same people who are, the same authority that says, look at all these confounding variables, are also people who are pushing for the vaccines and the mandates and the quarantine and the lockdown and saying basically there's no harm to these things. Except he just pointed out alcohol use goes up, likely abuse goes up, drug abuse goes up, addiction, depression, suicide, all of these social ills go up in an era of homeschooling and lockdowns and loss of employment due to vaccine mandates and all this other stuff. Yeah, bad stuff happens in the world, which is why we should be hesitant to institute things like lockdowns and mandates. They're not zero risk, zero cost choices for society.
Wasn't the best decision either.
What I'm saying is, if after the vaccine is available, more people die of heart failure over a time where alcohol consumption went up, as did depression.
That could be an option.
That's right.
That's a very good point.
That's all I'm saying here. But let's give it to you that the vaccine caused this. Let's just say that, okay?
Yeah.
And add it all up, and you get, what was it, 1,500 post-vaccine?
29 to 1,500.
Oh,
29 deaths.
29 sports deaths, 1,500.
Thousands of deaths, let's
Yeah.
say, okay? Let's say 10,000 even. Let's just do that, okay? All right. You can estimate how many deaths the vaccine saved during COVID, okay? Because you can look at the death numbers drop off as people got vaccinated. It's in the tens of millions. Again, you can make a decision. Do I not want to die from COVID at this rate that occurred in this world? Or do I not want to die from this complication from the vaccine itself, the heart failure? So make your decision. And so you'll say, I might be in that 1,500, so I'm not going to take. Then you get COVID and die from COVID, right? So you just make the decision.
You know what I would say to that?
This is where this conversation starts to break down. Because the problem is, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. The problem is when you, in the modern discourse, when you try and have a conversation based on facts, objective facts, and you cite statistics, the problem is the data can be corrupted, can be twisted, can be manipulated. And there's 1,001 ways that can happen. We could spend all of our lives chasing down rabbit holes looking for things. Here's an example. During COVID, certain doctors were instructed that if COVID was present, it should be marked as a cause of death. Not a contributing factor, but the cause of death. That's how we get quirky things. This is anecdotal, but it is illustrative of the larger point. An 18-year-old man dies in a motorcycle accident. He had COVID at the time that he died. COVID was listed as a cause of death. Now, maybe he coughed going through an intersection and laid his bike down. Who knows? We weren't there. But it's an example of how Neil deGrasse Tyson is referencing tens of millions of deaths. He's referencing in this conversation a 3% death rate. He's obfuscating the fact that 3% is way out of line of what actually happened. It was one of the estimates. And further, that most of the deaths occurred in very old, very fat, very already sick populations. Patrick Bet-David is pointing out that these young, healthy people are having a negative downside from the vaccine, and they themselves hold very little risk to getting COVID and dying from COVID. It was very rare with younger people. And at the same time, the scientific establishment has now admitted, and frankly, if you've studied epidemiology, the study of disease transmission and origination, vaccines don't prevent transmission. What happens is, even with a good vaccine, even with a vaccine for something like, this happened recently, mumps. I think it went through the NHL. There was an outbreak of mumps. And mumps is a nasty virus, causes all sorts of trouble. Most of the symptomatic cases occurred in non-vaccinated players and staff, people from other countries perhaps, who didn't have as strong of a vaccination program. That happens. But there were plenty of people who were vaccinated who tested positive, but were asymptomatic. Because what the vaccine does is makes your case less severe. So what he's saying is, if you're a young, healthy person and you choose not to get the vaccine, you could die from COVID. That's like saying you could be struck by lightning. Statistically speaking, they're pretty comparable. But he's trying still to instill that fear, that idea that there's a generalized risk to COVID across the whole population. Because Mr. Read the Data is obfuscating the simple fact that the death rates, the severe risk rates of COVID are trenched very specifically and are heavily weighted towards certain portions of the population.
But you know what I would say to that?
What would you say?
Here's what I would say to that. I would say, perfect. Let me take the risk. And thank you for giving it to me that way versus telling me it's one or the other, which is how it was
you are
presented.
informed fully about what the risks are. But like I said, as a species, we're not very good at thinking statistically about it. We're just not. And when we want to, we believe we're going to be the exception. And look at the people betting on lotteries. You know, they think they're going to win.
But for me, like, you know, the moment they started saying you have to put on cigarettes, the risk of heart failure, cancer, this, that. And if you still want to smoke cigarettes, guess what? You got a risk if you smoke cigarettes. You may get lung cancer, right? Hey, if you eat this, if you do this, if you do that.
You know, we've denied your admission to the bar. There's a cost to that because it's a public health issue. And so, right, you are free to smoke the cigarette, but not in my establishment by law.
Not in your establishment.
By law.
By law.
Correct.
No problem.
Right.
Totally fine.
But that's an example.
But if you want to smoke cigarettes outside,
Neil,
you can.
And you can live on the beach unvaccinated, that's fine.
Neil, let me ask you this. So what state would you say was the most responsible during COVID?
State? I don't know. I never looked.
So if you're a stats guy. I have
no idea.
Okay, I'm a stats guy as well. I like stats, but I'm more financial. I'm not like, you know, but I understand what you're saying.
A lot of stats and finance.
I'm a baseball guy, so I like stats.
Okay.
I'm all about stats. I love baseball. So if we look at the stats, the media made Florida seem the most irresponsible state. That's what the media made it look. Okay.
We're in Florida right now. You guys do have kind of a bad reputation on a lot of stuff.
Okay, sure. So, and by the way, I've lived in California 24 years, 5 years in Texas, 2 years in Florida.
Okay.
Just so you know my background.
That's right. Okay.
10 years in Iran, 2 years in Germany. That's kind of my background. A couple years in the military. But if we say, hey, if we look at the data, the most irresponsible state was Florida. You would have heard many times news telling you that. When I go to California and I would say,
as proof of this, they tried to give Ron DeSantis the nickname Death Santis as a way of saying he's so dangerous, he's so irresponsible. The people of Florida are suffering.
Hey, I'm in Florida. I'm like, oh my God, you're in Florida. Oh my, it's horrible. But you know what I realized? Here's what I realized. If the state of Florida is so bad, why did the NBA during Black Lives Matter host the playoffs in Florida?
In the bubble.
If Florida
I thought they created a bubble for themselves.
But why did they come here? They could have done it in Texas. Texas got plenty of places they could do it in. Why did they do it here?
I don't know.
But the point is, they felt safest.
Wait, I'm not going to use the NBA as a measure of what is
They also did the Super Bowl here.
A lot of the Super Bowl was here. I'll give you another one. Pro-vaccine AOC for vacation. She came to Miami. People from New York and California were partying for Miami. During COVID, when everybody was looking for a home during Christmas where to go to, you couldn't go to Colorado. You couldn't go to Lake Tahoe because it sucked. You had all these other choices. Everybody came to Florida.
I'm not going to judge the safety of a... I can't use that as a statistics of safety. I can't. I don't care who chooses where to vacation. I care what your death rates are, what your vaccination...
And I want to give Neil deGrasse Tyson his due. He's saying, please make a fact-based argument, because as a scientist, I want to analyze the facts. That is proper training. That is what he should do. Anecdotes are emotionally resonant, but they are less useful as data points. That being said, anecdotes do speak to market behavior. In other words, the broad-based movement of lay people, of non-expert people. And there is a certain wisdom and sometimes a certain foolishness to that kind of crowd behavior.
Rates are, what your hospitalization rates are, that would be an objective measure from state to state. What state are you most likely to die in from COVID? That's a statistic I would pay attention to. What state has the least hospital beds to accommodate those who are sick from COVID, even if they're not going to die from COVID? I would want to know that. I'm not going to base a decision on whether the NBA chose to put their bubble in the state.
Well, statistically, New York and California does not look good. Statistically, New York and California, and they're supposed to be the most responsible ones. Those two states didn't look good. All I'm saying is, from my end, in a space where I sit there and I listen to you and I learn. I say, oh my gosh, look, I had no clue about that. That was brilliant. That's interesting. Let me go research. Let me go look at this. I'm a guy that likes debate of experts in two different sides and let them make the argument. And I'm mature enough to know the better salesman doesn't necessarily have the better argument.
Good. But let me just say that there's nothing I've said in the last half hour that is a debating point. All I'm telling you, but you can debate whether you should still be able to work and put other workers at risk for not having vaccinated. You can debate that.
Yeah.
In the context of public health, that's a risk factor that we don't want to introduce to other people because of your decisions. That's a public health issue. It's been going on basically for 100 and something years since, who's the woman who, some famous medical case, a person who spread, what is that case?
Recently?
No, 100 years ago.
Oh.
It created a whole wave of sanitation rules and things for public health sake.
I'm not familiar.
But anyway, the point is, I want to make sure you know you can focus on the 1,500 people who died after the vaccine.
Mary Mallon? You're talking about the history of typhoid fever?
Yeah, Typhoid Mary. Yes, thank you.
By the way, everyone has a brain fart from time to time. Totally happens. Typhoid Mary. Makes sense. All right, let's see where we're going with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know her last name.
Yeah.
I thought typhoid was her first name.
Typhoid Mary.
Okay. Wait. So it's simply a matter of, if you're saying you don't want to be in the 2,000, whatever the number is, who died after the vaccine from heart failure at the peak of your physical career, not totally necessarily factoring in all the other abuses that went on over that time that may have contributed to it. Instead, you want to take the risk of COVID and not be one of the 20 million people who would have died and didn't, right? So I just want you to have the statistics in front of you. And it seems to me most people would, in most cases, choose the path that reduces their chance of death.
But by the way, I don't...
Here's the funny thing. He's got a point. And so it should be flummoxing to the experts. Why are people making such poor choices? This is their life that we're talking about. This is the risk. This is danger. Don't you want to choose the path that leads to not death? And then they look at people who are conflating the issue and confusing the issue and tossing in a bunch of irrelevant things, kind of the witch doctor-y, superstitious thinking. And they say, it's so frustrating that these people are talking about these things that confuse the non-experts and make them not adopt these wise, simple, normal, better choices. You're welcome to believe that. The challenge comes when you say, I want to use the force of government to silence those voices that don't agree with me. That is a very, very dangerous decision and not one to be taken lightly. But the experts in our society, scientists among them, are all too willing to control speech in order to push forward their own expertise point of view.
Disagree.
That's why I'm not debating. I'm just saying, I'm putting it out there.
But this part of what you're saying, I'm 100% with you. But this is...
It's not a matter of being with me. It's just, are you with the decision-making of what is rational, statistical analysis?
But this position is not an arrogant position. This position is kind of like when you're sitting there and you tell the doctor, so doc, what do? Do I get the surgery? Like, we have one of my good friends right now is getting a brain surgery in the next couple of weeks. She's afraid. Now, she believes in God, so faith is kind of calming her down, but she's afraid, okay? The doctor says, there's a 10% chance you're not going to make it. Mm-hmm. Do you want to, for the rest of your life, live having to take that medication with the side effects, or do you want to do the surgery? The individual is making a decision to get the surgery. She knows the chances is what? 10%. You know what I say to that? Hey, at least I know the risk. Versus, no, if you take this, you won't get anything. Propaganda, selling me this. Like, what's the three things that you say? There's three different types of truth, right? It's objective truth, personal truth,
and political truth.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the one I have a problem with. And I agree with you.
Should we all?
And that's the part I have a problem.
And here's the crux of it. They're talking about certain types of truth, political truth being one of those. In other words, what is the set of facts or truth that is most useful for my political faction or for my political purposes? And the problem is, everyone has a bias. And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson is blind to his own bias, recognizing that he has been influenced to give him the credit, to give him benefit of the doubt. Perhaps he has inadvertently accepted certain political truths, and that has overridden what should be his trained scientific skepticism. That is the best benefit of the doubt that I can get. I would hate to think that he is intentionally trying to manipulate the public. But there are bad actors out there, and he sure seems to speak consistently. But here he's saying we should all be concerned about political truth. That's a good point, but what do your actions say?
Problem with. I'm personal truth. Let's debate. Have fun with it. Great. Let the audience.
Personal truth. Yeah. You want to debate personal truth.
Exactly. That's cool.
Okay. Kirk or Picard. You know.
Yes.
Whatever.
Yes.
But is that a Star Trek reference?
Dude, who let him in?
I'm sorry.
Who let him in?
They've been asking that question for years.
The political truth, I think, is what brought a lot of division in households and companies, different places.
Of course
I think that's what happened the last 2.5 years, specifically with that. And you know this, like, you took it, you didn't take it, you're part of a political party. Like, you may be positioning me right now.
Statistically, that was a correct statement.
Yeah, statistically it was. But what was interesting is that people with no college degrees took the vaccine less than those with bachelor's degrees, but then MBA was the least, which is kind of funny. MBA people took the least amount of vaccine percent.
Sociological.
Yeah, interesting sociology statistics.
So what did we learn from all this? We spent over an hour on this conversation. What did we learn from this? Well, we learned that here in 2023, years and years after COVID first hit, and we should all be, you would think the science would be settled by now. We still have some major conversations that our country needs to have. We still have a major division within the country, and it does appear to break down upon, if not political, let's call it ideological lines. And if I was to try and encompass that in a way that's easy to grasp, there's an ideological group. There's a group of people who all believe a similar set of ideals. That's what I would call an ideological group. Okay. There are a group of people who believe that society has advanced by trusting on human expertise developed through rigorous study and disciplined thought and careful, meticulous planning, research, implementation, development, etc., of scientific methods and instruments, of drugs and disease analysis, etc., etc., and that society is better for it. And therefore, we would be foolish to turn our backs on that group that we have invested so much time and money and effort into developing their scientific expertise. And they're not wrong. They have some very, very valid points. That's absolutely true. The scientific establishment, to the extent that it practices good science, is one of the best things that we've done in the history of humanity. Just objectively speaking, it has extended our lives. It has improved the quality of our lives. It has made so many things better about living in this world. There's another ideological side that tilts towards the individual, towards the sovereignty of the self, towards the idea that each of us, assuming that we are fully grown adults, competent, functional, that we've had all the opportunity that we might want to gain education and expertise and knowledge and life experience, and therefore, hopefully, a measure of wisdom, that we are better as a society when individuals make free choices. When individuals choose freely, society as a whole benefits. And they are not wrong either, because the simple truth is, personal liberty leads to innovation. It leads to value. It leads to wealth creation. I mean, look at it this way. If we didn't have protection of intellectual property, do you really think people would waste and wear out decades of their lives trying to invent refrigeration, air conditioning, combustion motor, assembly line production, information technology, I mean, there's so many things that people sacrifice huge chunks of their lives in order to create that are so valuable, that benefit all of our lives. And if the individual didn't have the opportunity to benefit from that individual sacrifice that they freely went and chose to do, it wouldn't happen. There's a reason why communist Russia innovated almost nothing. Pretty much everything that they did was copying other people's innovations. That's why when it comes to military technology, one of the things that they spent the most money on, they were always behind the curve. I would argue the reason for that is because in such an authoritarian communist state, the individual has no incentive to sacrifice and to innovate. So society as a whole benefits when individuals are free to make their own choices. Now, some individuals suffer from that much freedom. Some individuals, if you give them plenty of freedom and plenty of money, will go drink themselves into a stupor and live under a bridge. Some individuals, if you give them almost no money, but you give them the freedom to think and act and work, will build multi-billion-dollar companies. It's happened, and it will happen again, thankfully. That is the reality of the human condition. If you allow humans individually to act, then you're going to get unequal outcomes. In the modern parlance, equity is the idea of equal outcomes. So individual market actors making their own choices based on their own wisdom lead to an inequitable society, a society where not everybody ends up with the same results or even close to the same results. Okay? I don't think that's a bad thing. But the people on the left are very convinced that that's a bad thing. That's why income inequality and wealth inequality and all of these things are talked about, because social justice is the idea of redressing the imbalances in society. The modern social justice movement rests on the idea that because society has a different outcome that can be viewed at a group level, therefore it must be racist. Because if society was not racist, the groups would be equal. That's what they're saying. It's nonsense. But they're passionate about it. That's a big part of what the conversation is about right now. So there are arguments that are valid on both sides of this ideological chasm. We need both sides. A healthy society carries tension between ideological groups. It is a bad idea to have a society where everyone is in one group. If everyone in a group embraces, and in a society embraces the same ideology, there's no pushback, there's no counterbalance. And if there's any flaw in that ideology, that society goes off the cliff because there's nothing to stop them. It is good for us to have competing, opposing political viewpoints. That's why I encourage rationalizing your own position and understanding the other person's position and arguing in good faith in an effort to try and persuade the other person and them to do the same to you, because both of you will end up stronger, both of you will end up better off for that, and you create a more vibrant civil society if we live in a society where we are allowed to have ideas in tension and to argue and debate and push back and forth on each other. Which is why I find it, you might say, unforgivable. Let's just say I cannot support. That's why I cannot support the idea of government censorship. The idea of using the force of law, which is essentially the force of violence or implied threatened violence, to silence speech and thought that doesn't agree with the medical establishment. Because what that's saying, as soon as you open that door and say that it is rational and right for the government, with its monopoly on force, to shut down certain viewpoints, what you're saying is, we have society, we have this ideological group and this ideological group, and they're under tension. But this one's right, so the government is going to squash this one, and off the cliff we go. That's the problem at its heart with COVID vaccines. That's the problem. This has been The Breakdown. Let me know what you think of it, and everyone, good luck out there.